DigitalRadius has become a really critical part to the mid-market strategic initiatives family here at SAP, and Andre's stepped forward and been able to provide a lot of value to our customers, other partners, operating partners within the PE and VC space. So Andre, I want to just thank you so much for leaning in with us so far in jumping into this presentation with us today. I'll let you take it over from here.
No, great, thank you. Thanks so much. Really excited to be here, and you'll notice that as I go through this, I'm sort of technical in nature, and I love talking about this stuff. So this is actually the kind of thing that I love to dive into. About me, about DigitalRadius. So DigitalRadius was founded 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now. And my background before DR, just go into that, I spent 6 years at Moderna. I built out the enterprise systems team. Along the way, and relevant to this conversation, I owned and ran HRIS and everything attached to it, and including we built out a full worker digital twin. We didn't even know digital twin really, at that point it was really only used in the manufacturing space as terminology, but we built out this model of sort of worker data analytics and deeper understanding to a lot of what Megan said, sort of how do we create deeper understanding around our workforce, and that was critical to Stefan, the CEO at Moderna, still is. So after that, I took over as VP Enterprise Systems Resilience, a company that broke a lot of Moderna's funding records in the life sciences space. Owned HRIS again, along with ERP integration, broad set of other capabilities. I would argue these two are the most innovative digital companies in the life sciences ecosystem, really doing some pretty incredible things, and I'm very lucky to be at both of them. I'm a managing partner of an investment fund that focuses on SaaS. This is really multiple different angles of looking at the same B2B SaaS space, the enterprise system space. So I've done, I think it's actually now over 200, counting what DigitalRadius does, that I've been involved in. And a little while back, won the Innovation Award from Moderna for the work we did, Innovation Award from SAP for the work we did at Moderna. I advise quite a few SaaS companies and VC firms, really about how do they fit in the SaaS technology space, or in the VC side, how does technology help improve returns for them and really help them build more scalable companies. DigitalRadius is about 20 people. We're a digital transformation partner across the across the enterprise. We focus in on the G&A space. We really focus in on HR and finance and everything that is attached to it. That's really our core space. And we are data driven, right? We are very data centric. That's how we approach these problems. So I can dive into that a little bit more as we go. If we can go to the next slide. Probably in some ways the most important or most impressive thing I've got up here today is, the client list. This is who we work with, largely life sciences, where we started. Now we've grown to include quite a few companies in other areas, construction, manufacturing, energy. But we build technical platforms for companies that are interested in scalability and efficiency. That's really what we do. We come in and say, if you're looking to do something transformative with your business, with your technology, we've got a framework that includes partners, includes software providers. We're a huge fan of SAP, been an SAP advisory shop from day one. We come in and say, well, what does the future look like? It's why we're a specialty shop, right? We're not going to come in and try to do everything for you ourselves. We're really that advisor that shows you how to do it. And then in some cases, analytics, integration, and some other workflow solutions, we also do the technical execution. So broad set of experience, and diving into the HRIS space in this conversation today, I wanted to start with a question, right? This is, and by the way, animated by Dolly. I figured that was appropriate for today. So Dolly gets credit for the images. Start with a question: who are my best people? So if I was coming in, we're coming into a new company's 15 years old, we're doing an acquisition. Who are the best people at that company? The answer, if you just click forward one, the answer HR would give would probably be something like performance data, right? Pretty standard stuff, been around for a long time. What does that really tell you, right? What do you really know from performance data? And there's sort of a central narrative here that I'm going to come back to throughout the talk. Let me give a personal story. No, if you go back one, sorry. Let me give a personal story. When I started at Moderna, I converted over from a contractor. I'd actually started my own company Stefan convinced me that what he was doing, which was about 150 people at the time, Darren was 150, what he was doing was more exciting than what I was working on, which is true, and certainly with what has happened since, I mean, absolutely true, and an unbelievable journey there. I started at quite a junior level, and I think in part because of that, over the 6 years I was there, I had the highest rate of promotion and the highest rate of salary growth of the company. I knew that. I owned all the HR data. We had a policy that said, any year you're promoted, you can't get higher than a 3 on your performance rating. So I got promoted 5 times in 6 years. So I had a lot of 3s. So let's say, okay, I'm coming in now. Let's say Moderna, it wasn't Moderna, say it's a manufacturing company and it's getting acquired. What would I look like from an analytics perspective? Somebody that I want to retain, critical to the business, high performer, potential for future growth? It's hard, right? It's hard to really know that. When we look at these data sets that exist today in HR, and this is, I think, a lot of the reasons that we don't necessarily trust them or invest in them, they're not significant, right? These are very small data sets. They're usually, often they're annual, maybe monthly at best. They're largely qualitative. They're based on opinion, right? It's what do we think? What do we think about this person who works for us? That's what these data sets mostly come back to. There are companies, including SAP with Qualtrics and other solutions out there saying, okay, can we push this, right? Can we try to create broader data sets? What I'm going to talk about today is sort of how do we open that up, right? How do we break open this conversation around what's the data that we have? So go for one slide. The other question that comes up a lot that HR really isn't prepared to handle today, and very important in an M&A type environment, is what happens when, right? What do we do with these scenario-based questions? Typically, and Nick covered quite a lot of this in his talk, the data is not available. The data analytics team doesn't exist. There's probably data analytics team somewhere in the company, but most likely not in HR because it's largely a reporting function. And the answers are usually qualitative and reactive. So we're trying to figure out what will happen, but really we're kind of looking backwards, right? That's mostly what we do with HR data. We look back at the past. And that means that those HR teams aren't seen as big value levers or drivers of these sort of scenario-based planning and modeling type situations. In finance, this would be a disaster, right? In finance, I come from a finance background myself. In finance, we said, hey, instead of FP&A, we're just going to look at what we did last quarter. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? We'd always want to be looking forward. We're always doing analytics. We're always looking at the future. Finance is somewhat easier in that sense, and I'll come back to markets, right? I started on that side of finance in the hedge fund world. There's a lot of analysis that in the finance space we're very comfortable with. In the HR space, we think, oh, well, we really just have this performance data, this historical information with very limited data sets. If you can click forward one. So why, right? And I think Mick covered a lot of this and saying a lot of the same things. There isn't really the data literacy inside the HR teams. I agree with what Mick said. This is shifting, but especially at the leadership level today, the leadership in HR didn't come up in a world where data analytics, digital IT software systems were sort of core. This is very much at the periphery. It's still at the periphery, really, in the HR conversation. There's generally poor data quality. It's qualitative. There's siloed data. There's lots of different data living in different systems across the enterprise, possibly even multiple HRIS or core HRIS systems, but even outside of the HRIS platform, likely many other data sources that are not connected. If they are connected, they're probably connecting something limited, like demographic feeds, first name, last name, email, right? That get consumed everywhere in the company. But how about I try to answer the question of where do my best people come from? Well, then I have to combine applicant tracking data, unless it's already an ATS plus HCM type solution. I have to combine applicant tracking data with HCM data. This kind of stuff really starts to break down pretty quickly. There's limited resources within HR. It wasn't really seen as a value driver, so there wasn't a lot of strategic investment in analytics, and there's a lack of strategic focus. We haven't been going to HR and saying, hey, you know what you need to do? You need to really start hiring people with R and Python backgrounds. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a HR job posting with R and Python as the primary skills. In finance or in sales, we'd actually be used to that today. Sales analyst with a Python background, yeah, it makes sense, right? We're going to hire that person. So there's a lot here that's a problem, but I think there's also a bigger challenge. And if you can go forward a slide. I think the bigger challenge is that leadership does not typically invest in HR analytics. In other words, we're not pushing top down to say, hey, you know what you need to do is build this capability. Why not, right? And I'll come back to this again. If this was a customer record, it would be bizarre at this point in 2023 to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to know that much about our customers, right? We're okay with the data that exists, and when they buy something, it's fine, we'll keep that and we'll put it in a database, but we're not really going to enrich it. We're not going to combine data sets. We're just going to keep a very limited set of information in CRM, and we'll run annual reports. We would never do that from a customer perspective, right? 360 view of the customer, truly deeply understanding the customer. That's a critical data object that we're going to put a lot of time and energy into. HR analytics, we don't do this, right? Leadership teams don't really believe it can be done, or maybe that it can add value. HR generally is viewed as a cost center, not a strategic partner or value driver. I mean, maybe it's strategic around sort of leadership and succession planning, things like that. But when you get into this deeper, how do I understand my broader workforce? You wouldn't naturally go and say, hey, we're going to do this through analytics and reporting. HR is not viewed as having the skills or the time, or the team to really make this worthwhile. I mean, you wouldn't, again, coming back to that, I've never seen an HR job posting with Python and R. And leadership teams are often not aware that this kind of concept of deeper value generation is really possible. And these are all things that act as blocking items to this sort of, how do we get away from reporting and sort of mid-tier analytics and move up to the much more value-added, much more strategic conversation. So if you can go forward slide. What if we did it the other way, right? What if we looked at worker data as an asset, the way that we look at customer data? Or we're used to this in the customer space. So what if we said, all right, we're going to take the data, we're going to integrate across multiple platforms, we're going to combine internal and external enrichment data, external data sets, to create a 360-degree view of the worker. It's a very different project than is typically sort of framed up in terms of what does HR analytics mean. This is worker analytics, workforce analytics. And I'll say, actually, I use the word worker all the time because it's not just employees. Modern companies today, many times we show up at a client, they say, hey, we've got integrated, onboarding, offboarding, et cetera. It only covers FTEs, right? The data analytics only covers FTEs, but they may have a critical team that's consultants, contractors, service providers. Where are they? Where are they in the data model? Do we know them? Do we understand them? Do we know who they work for and how they perform, right? And that's today, the concept of worker is much broader than the people paid full-time salaries. And that's an important distinction. So how do we build true analytics capabilities? How do we test hypotheses and discover new insights? Again, in the customer space, we do this all the time. We build personas, we do A/B testing. This is very normal stuff. It's very well defined at this point. We don't in the worker space. And how do we then get to actionable insights to improve both worker and manager performance, overall company performance, project performance, right, team performance? We need to start thinking along those lines. How do we take HR data and use it to do this value unlock? So with this approach, integrated worker data analytics can be transformative for organizations. In an M&A setting or a PE setting, you're coming in, investment hypothesis, what is it that we're going to do in order to create value to hit the IRR numbers that we want to hit? A lot of times HR is not seen as anything really other than sort of a cost center, maybe a bit of input. But what I'm saying here is it's not necessarily HR. It's really worker data that we're focused on, right? It is HR, it's sort of part of HR, but in many ways, this is actually much broader. It's a much bigger conversation around how do I manage and understand my workforce. So we want to go forward a slide. So what does this look like, right? What does it actually look like to implement? We've done this work, right? What does it mean to say, okay, great, this is interesting. I think that we could maybe get some value out of this at our firm or at our portcos, but what does it actually look like to implement? First, you need strong data platforms, right? You need good structured data, right? You need this to be coming in, HRIS tools, ATS tools, et cetera, but also way out into the enterprise environment. How do we understand everything about our workforce? You need to integrate systems. You need that data to flow between different systems so that then you can push it somewhere for data analytics. You need a central worker data warehouse or worker data repository with a unique worker data model. I actually love what Mick said earlier about commute. I challenge anyone to ask, who has commute time in their current worker data analytics platform, right? Like you would say, hey, that's indicative, broadly indicative of involuntary terms of people we want to retain. And so we've got a pretty strong signal here, and it might even be a leading indicator that we could get ahead of. I bet it's not there, right? I bet it's not there, and we have it in our data warehouse, but I don't think in most clients or most situations, I don't think I've ever come in and seen that. because we don't think of it that way. Again, this is external data sources. You've got to do a lookup. There's an API to hit, and you can do this with Google Maps. I can look up somebody's commute times, but it's probably not something that then exists in your in your data warehouse. You then need a BI or AI/ML solution, some kind of analytics capability that sits on top of it. And you need to know, okay, you want to come at this kind of, who are my best people and how are teams performing in some of those what if type scenarios. That becomes more of a click of the button, or certainly it becomes something that you can point your data scientists at and deliver real value, really get something out of that and sort of signal to noise ratio. This is where it starts to become transformative. So we can go to the next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I promise. My team always gives me a hard time when I flash the slide. It's like an eye chart. All right, so all I'm saying here is it's a lot of different systems that need to come together to pull this worker data analytics into one place. It's not just your HRIS data. There's a lot of different data sources and a lot of information that needs to be pulled in. And I've got sort of a generic box here for external worker data, alt data. That's some of sort of the secret sauce behind what we do. But there's a lot here that needs to happen to achieve this. Does this need to happen day one? No, there's a crawl, walk, run approach here. You would start with some integrations. You'd start with building up your data warehouse, building up that data repository. But this is an example of what we've built. Built this at multiple clients and places I've worked. And this is transformative. Right? If this is built properly, this is transformative. So again, not going to go deep into it. Anyone who wants to talk about this stuff, I'm an enterprise architect, would love to talk this stuff. But again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the slide. But it is, I think, just good to give that big picture. So we can go forward. All right. So what does this look like in a typical 2,000 person portco? Right? What does this look like if we came in and said, hey, we're going to build this out? Data sources are usually disconnected, possibly not even mapped. We would come in and create the data map and the process flow documentation. We build the integrations to HRIS solutions and other worker data sources. We build out that data warehouse, and we'd work with the company resources on analytics as desired, if there is that internal analytics capability. So looking at that cost, what does it cost to implement? Usually there's a software spend attached to this. There's some consulting cost, and you can achieve a quick time to value. You can achieve 3 to 6 months time to value. And that ROI, that can be demonstrated in the first 3 months. We've got a demonstrated 250% ROI in the first 3 months. That can become really transformative to the business. Usually these are companies that are technology focused. Doesn't mean they're technology companies. They want to think in terms of technology. They're focused on using software. So that's very much a part of their DNA. And they view worker analytics as critical, right? As something very central to their operating model and an overall value driver. You can go to I think probably the last slide. Sorry, if you can go one more slide. No, just back one. Thanks. So you already own this data, right? This is the point of what we're saying here. You already own this data. It's time to unlock the value. The data exists in your ecosystem and the ecosystem of the portcos. It's time to unlock the value of that information.